Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jackie Miller. I'm President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Seattle and Vice Chair, co-Vice Chair of the Board of Directors of the World Affairs Councils of America. I am between you and your dinner. That is a dangerous place. I will be quick. And Matthew only gave me 2 minutes, so there you go. It is so wonderful to see so many friends, old and new, and colleagues gathered here tonight for what I know is going to be an inspiring evening, but no pressure, Michael and Chris, it'll be great. For many of us here and out there, it has been a year of really intense challenges, but also new opportunities. So the chance to gather in community, and I know you're out there, I just can't see you, but the chance to gather in community to remind ourselves of the importance and the relevance of our work and to be inspired is, for me, a really welcome moment, and I hope it's something you're looking forward to as well. Thank you for joining us as we celebrate tonight the power and importance of global engagement and the work that we all do in our communities to connect the global and the local. Our theme this year, The World on Balance, couldn't be more timely. We live in a moment of extraordinary complexity, of extraordinary polarity, and it is a moment for the World Affairs Councils. This theme, I think, really invites us to reflect on how we can use our trusted platforms in our communities to bridge divides and foster civil dialogue and discussion on global issues and their local importance. I think it also invites reflection on leadership, on connection, and renewal in a time of global uncertainty. We're seeing alliances shift, we're seeing new challenges emerge, and it's redefining the international landscape very, very quickly. And this evening and this conference is going to explore what it means to restore balance between people, priorities, and countries. So tonight's program is going to give us much to think about, but it's also a celebration. As a former staff member of the Council of Foreign Relations here in DC, and a current life member of the Council of Foreign Relations in the other Washington, some would say the better Washington, I'm truly excited that we're going to honor the Council of Foreign Relations with the International Service Award. CFR President Michael Froman, Ambassador Michael Froman, is here to accept the award, and we'll have a conversation with Chris Wallace about the World on Balance. It's really a rare opportunity to hear two voices with such deep experience engage on the issues that are shaping our future. And as we gather, I'm reminded why the work of the World Affairs Councils matters so deeply across our national network, whether the World Affairs Council of Seattle or the World Affairs Council of Maine, and every council in between. Also, shout out to Alaska and Hawaii. You're not quite in there, so we'll get you guys in there too. Councils create civil space for dialogue, spaces where curiosity triumphs over division and where global understanding begins at the local level. When international headlines and domestic challenges seem so overwhelming, councils help communities make sense of it, make sense of the world, and not just find our place in it, but help shape our place in it. So thank you all for being a part of this mission. Your presence tonight really affirms that for all of our communities, global engagement is not a nice to have, it's a must have. And the most important thing that Matthew told me to tell you tonight was please enjoy your salads, and we'll be back shortly to begin the program. Thank you.
Please welcome WACA President and CEO, Matthew Hughes.
You know, they call that the voice of God. Have you heard that before, the voice of God? Oh, dear friends, dear colleagues, and dear guests, good evening to you, and let me add my welcome to the 2025 WACA National Conference. Thank you. It really is my honor and privilege to serve as the President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America and to get to greet representatives from our 90 community councils around the U.S. It's also a pleasure to gather with you again in Washington, D.C., which, Jackie, I'll keep as a nice Washington as well. Yeah, it's a good Washington. For what promises to be an energizing and inspiring 4 days. This year's conference brings together leaders, members, partners, and friends from these communities around the U.S., all united by a shared mission to foster deeper understanding of global issues and to strengthen an informed and engaged American public. But before we fully begin, I would like to take just a moment of reflection. This year, our council community experienced profound loss. Tonight, we honor the memory of Alexander Laurie of New York City, of Sky Forrester of Pittsburgh and Colorado Springs, and Jan Grayson of Louisville. Each of them, in their own way, contributed with generosity, intellect, and an unwavering commitment to global understanding. Their service strengthened our network and enriched all who had the privilege to work alongside them. And you'll hear more tonight about Alex and Sky, two beloved former national vice chairs, through the course of the evening. May their legacy continue to inspire us in the work ahead. As you heard Jackie mention, this year's theme, The World on Balance, allows us to examine the world all things considered. It allows us to consider themes of balance, when the world has been in balance or out of balance, balance of power, of trade, of arms, sure. But it also reminds us that balance is not a passive state, but an active practice. It requires an equilibrium of confidence and humility, understanding ourselves and understanding others, introspection and empathy, discipline and openness, firmness and gentleness. It demands that we hold multiple truths at once while navigating a world that is simultaneously depersonalized and hyper-personalized, a world where technology can distance us even as algorithms increasingly tailor information to each of us individually. And practice isn't a casual word. Its roots in Latin and Greek referred to that which is concerned with action, with doing, not merely with knowing. We practice medicine, don't we? We practice diplomacy, and here we practice community. It's something we return to day after day with discipline, humility, rigor, and aspiration. In an era of polarization, we create rare civic rooms where people can disagree without dehumanizing each other, where evidence and expertise still matter, and where disciplined, respectful conversation can bridge divides. Through this work, we cultivate both the mindset and the muscles of democratic engagement, what we might call the practice of community. Key to community is the essential element of trust, something that the Edelman Trust Barometer has chronicled for years. Trust, especially institutional trust, is fragile. Reinforcing it requires communities where people can be open, reflective, honest, and unafraid of feedback on their ideas and contributions. These are spaces where we respond thoughtfully rather than reactively, where we learn to listen, not for rebuttal, but for understanding. And this is precisely why the councils exist. Last year, we challenged ourselves to think and see from the other side, and this year we go a step further to grapple with the hard questions together in a spirit of inquiry that values restraint as much as ambition and civility as much as conviction. The World Affairs Councils of America exists to support, strengthen, and represent 90 incredible nonpartisan World Affairs Councils who deepen their community's global perspective, who practice community, build trust, and prepare their regions to be globally competitive. If you are a member of a World Affairs Council, this is the fun part, would you please stand to be recognized? And that should be most of the room. Before we move on with our program, we want to extend some heartfelt thanks to individuals and groups who have made this evening and this year and so much of the work of the World Affairs Councils possible. I want to extend heartfelt thanks to the WACA National Board of Directors, who has been led for the last 5.5 years by our incomparable chairman, Glenn Kramer. Could the WACA National Board please stand to be recognized? In June of this year, 3 tremendously talented and dedicated members of the WACA National Board ended their time on the board, and we'd like to recognize them tonight. Mimi Burke of Brownstein Hyatt Farber Schreck, Mimi Gregory of the Naples Council on World Affairs, and Marianne Maldonado, President and CEO of the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. Ladies, could you please stand to receive the thanks of our national network for your service? And I'm sending a hello to 2 predecessors of mine who are with us tonight, 2 former WACA presidents and CEOs who are in the room. Jerry Leach and Bill Clifford are with us this evening. Thank you both for being here. And this evening we also recognize the generosity of our sponsors. I hope you'll join me in thanking, and please do hold your applause to the end, the Malou and Carlos Alvarez family, who you'll hear more about this evening, Glenn and Mary Jane Kramer, Global Ties US, Thinkubator Global, the Foreign Policy Association, Mrs. Marielle Laurie, the children of Alex Laurie, the Canada-US Law Institute, Supporting Strategies, Mercer, Odgers, Eric Bratberg, Carl Schneider, the Davis and Goodman Foundation, Ambassador Alina Romanowski, Ambassador Barbara Stevenson, Tomasi Nanuye and Gregorian LLP, NAFSA, Asmar Abib, Colonel Matthew Butler, Dr. Sherry Mueller, and Helen Haig. Could you help us to thank our sponsors, please? Over the course of the coming days, you're going to experience a lot of conversations. Your brains will be full. You'll want some fresh air outside of the hotel, which I hope you'll enjoy. But the most important thing that we're doing here is strengthening social fabric and bringing our community together. We're sincerely grateful to all of you for believing that these conversations matter and for your presence here this week. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce my friend and colleague, Bill Clifford, former President and CEO of the World Affairs Councils of America, who will offer a special remembrance. Bill.
Good evening, everybody. So great to be on this stage again. A little weird, but I'm still not allergic to microphones somehow in retirement. Matthew, thank you for those words, and to you and your team, a big round of applause for all that you are doing in this challenging time to collaborate with colleagues and friends who are deeply committed to global perspective and understanding and dialogue. I'm here tonight to say a few words about someone who's known for being a man of few words, but let me assure you, they counted when they were spoken, and his curiosity and ideas, his responsibility and impact, especially as a long-serving board member to the World Affairs Councils of America, he literally personified WACA's mission and purpose. And before I mention anything further about Alex Laurie, I want to say how wonderful it is to have Christina and Carrie here, his daughter Christina, and of course Marielle, his wife. I have to say, I have to change my speech too, because I was expecting that Malou Alvarez would also be here. Malou is with her family in San Antonio to be honored for her husband Carlos Alvarez's legacy. And Marielle and Malou were here every year, and I have to promise you that I had you in mind as much as your husbands, even though they were the ones grading me on the conference and everything else. You two were very important to me, what you thought about our work, and it's so nice to see you here. I joined the wonderful celebration in September for Alex and learned more about what a devoted family man, a successful real estate developer and businessman, and proud Iranian American he was, and the communities and lives he touched, and the love and admiration he earned in return. Alex was born to a family of merchants in Yazd, one of Iran's oldest cities, a UNESCO World Heritage Site of some stunning architecture, a trade hub along the Silk Road once upon a time. And he set off for the U.S. after his early education in the early 60s. And by the end of the decade, he had earned a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering from New York University. He moved back to Iran during a booming time for that country's economy in the 70s, and with partners established a very successful construction enterprise where some of his buildings included cement and industrial plants, oil and gas facilities, an airport, an Olympic complex, and many, many thousands of residential units. I'm going to share a story here that I heard at that wonderful celebration of life, and I hope I got it right. When his wife and children were summering back in the United States, Alex liked to fly planes. He got his planes because he needed to work around a very sprawling part of Iran on projects, and he would fly to the Caspian Sea for a lunch. And this was how to pass the time when he was, trying to have some downtime. Well, one time he's about to fly back, and air traffic control tells him in the cockpit that there's a boy who's seriously ill and needs help in Iran, and his parents are weeping, and would Alex do this? He had a decision to make. It wasn't in accordance and compliance with the laws at the time, but he took the child and got that boy the help he needed in Tehran. Years later, in 1979, at the time of the revolution, Alex was leaving the country and was trying to get exit visas for his colleagues and himself. And it was, of course, a difficult, stressful time. And it turns out he went to an office where the father of that boy was on hand to process the visa he needed to move back to the United States. Have I got that story correct, more or less? I find it an amazing testament to his intrepidness and his decisiveness. And I say this because we abided by many rules and procedures and protocols on the WACA board, of which he was vice chair for since 2008. But every now and then, well, let's say just once that I know about, he broke the rule and didn't particularly tell anybody but me, but solved a problem. And it's a weird thing to think about. I know there are many here who are concerned with governance and bylaws, and you should be. But in this case, it had eventual impact. It had immediate impact, and it had eventual impact, and that's all I'm going to say about it. Alex and Carlos Alvarez rescued this organization in bumpy times before my tenure, and they did not want to see that happen again, nor did they want to rescue it again. So there was that. Speaking of bylaws, I know you're in the midst at WACA of changing yours, and good luck. It's a dry thing, but it's a necessary thing, and I'll say that we had a unanimous vote in 2015, I think, to do the prior revision. That included term limits for everyone, 2 terms only. Everybody was on board. That included the corporates and the lifers like Alex and Carlos, but when it came time to complete their 6 years, there was tension. We had an advisory board, and that's where we wanted them and some others that we wanted to keep close, but they let me know that it wasn't the nicest thing that they were no longer using their influence on the board. And so I spent that year counting down day by day till we could get them back. And that's important too, because Alex, who served in many ways in his very quiet, unassuming, I don't want to limelight, he was a co-chair for the search committee to bring us our next chair. He, Mimi Gregory, Rich Crepage, Derek Olson, my colleagues, were poking around the likes of Nick Burns, James Stavridis. Many of you have convened these leading national security and diplomatic experts. And Alex says to me, how about somebody from finance? And I said, absolutely, let's do it. We need freshness, let's do it. He knew somebody at Round Hill Club in Jamaica who he served with. That's Glenn Kramer. And Glenn then proceeded to have about 200 phone calls with me just before COVID. And thank God it was before, because if this had happened during or after COVID, I'm not sure we would have had Glenn. And Alex brought us Glenn, and Alex and Glenn and Carlos exuded the professionalism we were looking for, the stability that Walk Along searched for. And as we came out of COVID and made good on a challenge, a fundraising challenge, 1 month, and exceeded that goal, this was alchemy. And then we got an extraordinary endowment gift. And I get no credit for that. The credit goes to those three gentlemen. I can't pretend to be in Carlos's philanthropic head, although he had presented me directly an endowment before that I negotiated. But this one, I think, was the friendship and the respect of these men. And Alex, I understand, said, if you're going to do it, go big. Those are enough words. That's all I needed to know. And Glenn, I'm sure, closed the deal, and they announced this beautiful, transformative gift. Now, at this point, I would be shoved off the stage probably by Alex himself. I heard another story, which I actually lived in my board, which was when Carlos, who is kind of the opposite personality, except they're both warm, they're both smart, they're both immigrants, but Carlos can spin a yarn and take a board meeting way outside its function. And Alex apparently was known to pass around a little piece of paper that would eventually make its way to Carlos or somebody like Carlos, but I witnessed this, and it said, "Stop talking." That's my cue to stop talking. I just want to wish you all a happy Thanksgiving. I want to thank you. I want to hold in gratitude Alex Larry, Akbar Alexander Larry, who's a great colleague, a friend, one of the most decent people you will meet. He loved this conference. He loved this organization. And I encourage all of you to find your elders, your wise people, your men and women on the board who have the institutional memory, the dedication, and the generosity of Alex Larry. Thank you.
Please welcome to the stage Vice Chair of the World Affairs Councils of America, Ambassador Barbara Stevenson.
Good evening. It's just a pleasure to be with you all, and I wanted to just spend a minute reflecting on our Matthew Hughes's words about how much work it is to be on balance. Could we give a round of applause to Matthew for those thoughtful remarks? And may that work continue. It's my pleasure to welcome our 2025 WACA Student Scholars, a program made possible by a generous donation from the Malu and Carlos Alvarez family. Now in its 14th year, Student Scholars is a unique competitive opportunity for 25 undergraduates affiliated with councils across the country to attend the national conference at no cost to them. They also participate in Scholar Day. That's what they did all day today. It's full of curated activities exploring global DC. So today that meant visits to the Embassy of Mexico, the delegation of the European Union to the United States, the World Bank, and a presentation on competitive fellowships and scholarships, such as Fulbright, Rhodes Scholars, and others. The process starts with local councils advising or advertising for student scholars in their community, and then selecting one applicant to forward to the national office for a second selection round. This year, more councils nominated a student for the first time. Many thanks to each of you who did a nomination. It's hard to select just 25 young leaders to participate. It was hard to choose just 25 this year. So student scholars who are with us, and could you kind of raise your hands? It's so good to see you. You are the future of global engagement. Our council network benefits so much from your perspectives and passion, and something that was so clear in our board meeting is how much energy and optimism about the future that we draw from having you in our midst. So I want to say a big thank you and welcome to the conference. It's great to have you here. And now I'd like to recognize student scholar Roberto Carmona from the World Affairs Council of Miami to the stage for brief remarks. Roberto immigrated to the United States from Cuba in 2020, and he learned English in the span of 1 year. His passion for international relations and diplomacy was sparked after competing in the 2022 Academic World Quest competition, which then led him on a journey that led him to become an intern at the World Affairs Council of Miami in 2025, and then he's faltered since then. He's a first-year student at Harvard. Roberto is pursuing a joint concentration in government and history with the goal, are you ready, of becoming a key contributor to the future of democratization in his home country. Please welcome Roberto to the stage.
Good evening, everybody. So I'll promise I will keep my remarks as short as possible. I don't want to stand between you and the shirt, but I wanted to start off my remarks by sharing a little bit about my own story. As you guys probably heard, I'm an immigrant, and that is a powerful and scary word nowadays. In fact, next month, on December 9th of 2025, it will make 5 years since I immigrated to the United States from the island of Cuba. I was 14, thank you. I was 14, and I saw my life crumble. My tears merging with the 90 miles of sea that for the next 5 years will divide my past and present. At the beginning, I tried to speak. I tried to tell my story, but failed miserably. My tongue was a battlefield, and every mispronounced word was creating newer and deeper wounds all over my face. Yet, the story I want to tell you today is not about how I learned English. The story I want to tell you today is how I came to fall in love with the world of international relations and geopolitics. And after learning English, I participated in the local academic World Quest competition hosted by the World Affairs Council of Miami. It was the first time this competition was being hosted in our city, and we were able to make it to the national stage for the first time, representing the council actually for the first time since the competition's insertion earlier in the 2000s. I competed for 3 years, made it to the national competition in 3 consecutive years, and eventually interned at the World Affairs Council of Miami, where I helped organize the local academic World Quest competition for my 4th year of high school. All of this eventually led me to Harvard, where I now study government and history. And it also allowed me to stand before you today as a student scholar, representing 17 states within our own cohort. I wanted to share to you a little bit about today, and today we spoke directly with the Embassy of Mexico about the dynamic relationship between Mexico and the United States. We heard from Javier Sanchez Velasquez on the evolving diplomatic ties between the European Union and the United States, and we had the opportunity to engage with the World Bank to see firsthand how international cooperation shapes the world we live in. I speak on behalf of the entire cohort that standing in those rooms, inquiring to the people who sit at the room where it happens, truly reaffirmed our commitment for an international world that is just as equitable and dynamic. My message tonight is simple. It is our voice, curious and determined, that will carry the world forward. And specifically, as you guys heard, I want my voice to carry the future of democracy in my homeland. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful evening.
Please welcome Secretary of the WACA National Board, Carl Schneider.
Thank you. As a secretary, we have a fair amount of administrative duties, and tonight it is my sad duty to share with you that we have lost another powerhouse of a vice chair for WACA. It's a privilege to speak about Dr. Schuyler Forrester, or Sky, as he's most affectionately known, a teacher, a soldier, a statesman, and above all, a tireless builder of civic capacity and global understanding. Sky's career was defined by service to country and to ideas. A 1971 graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, a doctor of philosophy from Oxford, and a senior policy advisor in NATO and European security negotiations, he brought firsthand experience of geopolitics into every classroom and boardroom he entered. His scholarship and service gave him rare credibility. His warmth gave him rare influence. For 12 years, Sky led the World Affairs Council of Pittsburgh, building programs that connected local audiences to global stakes. On the national stage, he served on the board of the World Affairs Councils of America, shaping WACA, work to make foreign policy accessible and relevant. In Colorado Springs, he was our past president and an architect of the council's structure and mission. 17 years of steady, visionary leadership that moved our organization from good to enduring. Sky was a mentor to me on politics of the day, never dogmatic, always exacting. He taught me how to separate principle from partisanship, how to listen before advising, and how to translate complex policy into civic conversation. His guidance on nuclear deterrence, arms control, and democratic resilience sharpened my judgment and steadied our board's voice. He taught Air Force Academy cadets, advised scholars, chaired community initiatives, and sang in his church choir. He believed dialogue mattered, that informed citizens are the bedrock of a free society. That belief was his gift to every World Affairs Council he touched. We honor Sky best by doing what he asked of us, fostering thoughtful discourse, engaging our communities, and teaching the next generation to see the world whole. Thank you, Sky.
Please welcome to the stage, Chairman of the World Affairs Councils of America, Glenn Kramer.
Good evening, everyone. It's my honor to present the Chairman's Individual Award, which recognizes extraordinary dedication to the World Affairs Councils of America network and to the mission that we all share, fostering global understanding through dialogue and engagement. This year's recipient truly embodies this spirit. Returning from years in France, Mimi Gregory first joined the World Affairs Councils in Boston, World Boston, where her passion for international affairs and foreign policy quickly became evident. She brought that same energy to Naples, Florida, and continued this legacy of creating thoughtful, dynamic programs that connect communities to the world. Mimi has contributed at every level, serving at World Boston as vice president, being past president of the Naples Council of World Affairs, and a two-term member of the WACA National Board, serving on the executive committee, and I had the privilege of working with Mimi and when I was chair as vice chair for several years. She was a great partner to me. Twice honored by the French government, for her cultural leadership, Mimi exemplifies the global citizenship our organization celebrates. Mimi, we are so glad to have you here in person tonight. Please join me in congratulating the 2025 recipient of the Chairman's Individual Award, Mimi Gregory.
so much. Oops. Will you park it someplace?
Yes.
There. That's great. Good evening, everybody. There's a terrible light shining right in my face. Maybe that's good. You know, I know that many of you have stood up several times this evening, and I may ask you to do that again because this room is filled with wonderful people with great dedication to the council. And I'd like to begin by taking one moment to say to Marielle how much we miss Alex, and you are in our hearts, certainly. So I'd like to tell you a few funnier stories, I think, in any case. I had the privilege of learning about the councils from Sir Eldon Griffiths, who was our chairman for many years and a member of Parliament, who always wore his blue pinstripe suit with red socks. And sometimes those red socks had holes, but he said it was really a sign that they were always very thrifty at the House of Parliament. I'm not sure that was really true. But in any case, it was through him that we came to know Jerry Leach, and I know that many of you talked to Jerry this afternoon, and he will be with us again tomorrow. But Jerry was a wonderful leader and someone that we took, I think, special notice of, because if you didn't, Jerry would let you know that you should and that it was something important. And then he found a young leader for us named Bill Clifford, and I happened to be on the search committee, and we did, in fact, invite Bill, not for WACA, but in fact to be the leader of the Boston Council, which Bill did for many years, before then moving on to become the president of WACA. And as you know, Bill spoke to us earlier, and we were fortunate to have had him as our leader. There are certain people that you work with, and they have an amusing way of letting you know that they have appreciated what you've done. And so I want to say thank you to Don Samford and maybe Angela Weck, who may not know it yet, that I was made an honorary member of the Peoria Council. Now, that's something I had never planned on. But they are such great people at the Peoria Council, and I just had a wonderful time back and forth with Don, helping pick out some speakers for some of the wonderful programs that he and Angela have done for Peoria. Also, Joyce. Joyce, you had a taste of Joyce's wonderful journalistic capabilities this afternoon when she introduced Ed Luce. And just to let you know, we beat you to it in Naples. We had him 2 days earlier. And I know that really, really upset Matthew, because he said, Naples always has somebody. And that is our reputation, and I'm proud of it. Now, when we talk about being a recruiter, which I did for an honest living for many years, it came time for us to find a new chairman. And I want to tell you, it is our pleasure to have found Glenn Kramer. Glenn, we are so lucky to have you. Now, when Joyce introduced Ed Luce, she had a bevy of wonderful questions, and I have to say, she has always been a super helper in terms of devising what we should do with journalism. I know we're going to have a little chat later of parts of what journalism does for us. We have a great speaker coming up and looking forward to what he has to say. And certainly journalism is an #1 topic today, and probably ad infinitum. Serge Tomasian and I ended up in Israel at somewhat the same time on a trip that, in fact, was one of the leadership missions. And it was very interesting because we got there a day early and decided that, being both of the Orthodox faith and in my case, Serbian, and in Serge's case, Russian. We wanted to take an outside trip to visit some of the churches that were Orthodox churches that were available for visits. But we ended up having a terrible argument with the taxi driver. I started to say lorry driver. That's what happens if you spend 5 minutes in England. You have a new vocabulary. Nonetheless, we managed to see a few of the good churches there, and it was interesting, and we finally convinced him that he could take us back to our hotel and nothing would really happen to him like an arrest because he had a bad mouth. But it was a very interesting visit as well. Searching and finding, finally, the most important recent search that we've had has been for the person who now leads us, with Glenn's help, with the board's help. And there's nobody so far that I think can beat Matthew as to getting all of us organized. And if you aren't organized by Matthew, watch out. You will be at some time soon. So Matthew and Glenn, who's standing here with me, and all the members of our wonderful WACA board, would you stand up so that I can say thank you so much for all that you do for all of us? Stand up. Where are the board members? There you are. Great. Great. Thank you.
Please welcome Chair of the WACA Membership Committee, Nikki Shishido.
Wow. Congratulations, Mimi, and thank you so much for all you've done. Aloha, everyone. My name is Nikki Shishido. I'm the Executive Director at the Pacific and Asian Affairs Council, also WACA National Board Director and the Chair of the Membership Committee. It is my pleasure to introduce the Council of the Year Award, which celebrates a council whose programming, events, leadership, and growth have stood out in exceptional ways. This year's honoree has demonstrated all of that and more. They've built strong, mutually beneficial partnerships across their community, including with a major university. Their intergenerational approach is remarkable, creating pathways for young professionals, meaningful opportunities for business leaders, and thoughtful engagement with retirement communities. Their work reflects a high level of professionalism, paired with outstanding programs featuring diverse, timely, and globally relevant speakers. And perhaps most inspiring is their constant drive to learn, grow, and continue to meet the needs of their community. Please help us to congratulate this year's Council of the Year, the World Affairs Council of Jacksonville. And accepting the award is Council President and CEO Trina Medarev. Congratulations.
Well, thank you, Nikki, for that generous introduction and for presenting this award. It means the world coming from you. Thank you. And thank you to Matthew Hughes for leading WACA with such warmth and vision. This network is strong because of you and your stellar team. Tonight's recognition is especially meaningful. 20 years ago this month, under Jerry Leach's leadership, our Jacksonville Council was honored as the most dynamic small council. It was my very first year, and such a thrill to race to DC with our then board chair, Ambassador Marilyn McAfee, to accept that award. To be here 2 decades later, with both Matthew and Jerry in the room and on each side of me, celebrating the Council of the Year, feels like a full circle moment. I'm also incredibly proud to be here with our Jacksonville team, including our board chair, Amy Berg, who has driven extraordinary growth post-pandemic. Under her transformative leadership, we've attracted world-class speakers and strengthened both membership and sponsorship. Also, Vice Chair Jeff Bernardo, Treasurer Randy Evans, my colleague and programs partner, Rachel Paul, our former teammate and marketing guru, John Alaska, and our extraordinary Ambassador Marilyn McAfee Scholarship recipient and 2025 WACA Student Scholar, Abigail Fauché, who truly embodies the future we are all investing in. When I think about what I love most about our council, it always comes back to the people. Our 1,000 plus members, sponsors, and partners show up, curious, open-minded, eager to learn, and their energy is contagious. I also love that we are a community that genuinely values lifelong learning. You feel it at our Global Issues Evenings, which now reach more than 900 every month. Students, teachers, professors, young professionals, and business leaders, all in one room, ready to wrestle with big ideas. And thanks to 2 tremendous partners, Fleet Landing and Vickers Landing, we are now live streaming these programs to their retirement communities. Residents convene, enjoy a reception, participate fully, and text questions straight to the lecture hall. It's a meaningful new revenue stream, yes, but even more, it's connection, access, and engagement for those who benefit from staying close to home and from Bluetooth-enabled surround sound for assisted hearing. And then there are students who inspire me every single day through the Admiral Jonathan T. Howe Academic World Quest, engaging over 45 teams of 4 each, our International Crisis Management exercise, where students serve as the National Security Council, responding to a crisis in real time, and Great Decisions. Now in 21 high schools across 4 Northeast Florida counties, we see more than 600 young people stretch, grow, and discover their global voice. One of my favorite parts of our model, before every Global Issues evening, our speakers spend a full hour with these students. And imagine, as a teenager, dialoguing with Heather Cox Richardson, Andrew Ross Sorkin, Ambassador Bill Burns, Henry Louis Gates, or David Brooks, and asking them anything. No echo chambers, just real dialogue. None of this would be possible without our sustaining partner, the University of North Florida. Their belief in this work and their generosity in opening their doors to the community is a tremendous gift. And we are equally grateful for our sustaining partner and NPR affiliate, WJCT, who helps us amplify these conversations throughout our region. And I'm especially proud that our Global Issues evenings are free and open to the public. Access to thoughtful, nonpartisan global dialogue should never depend on someone's background or bank balance. In Northeast Florida, it doesn't. Which brings me to why this work, the work of all our councils, matters so deeply right now. We live in a moment defined by complexity. Global issues touch our lives every day, and people are seeking places they can trust to make sense of it all. World Affairs Councils offer something rare, a space where people can come together, hear different perspectives, and actually talk to one another. That's not just valuable, it's vital. Strong communities depend on globally aware citizens. When people understand the world, they engage more thoughtfully at home, in business, in education, and in civic life. And of course, we owe it to our young people. They deserve the chance to be curious, to ask questions, to meet remarkable leaders, and to build the global fluency their futures will require. The world isn't getting simpler or slower, but the councils give people the tools, the knowledge, and the confidence to navigate it together. Thank you.
Please welcome back to the stage Chairman Glenn Kramer.
Thank you. So now we turn to our last special recognition of the evening, the International Service Award. Each year, this award honors an individual or institution whose leadership has strengthened global understanding, advanced informed international engagement, and contributed meaningfully to a more cooperative world. Tonight, we are especially privileged to recognize an institution that has shaped American foreign policy for nearly a century, actually over a century. The Council on Foreign Relations. Since its founding in 1921, CFR has stood as a pillar of informed, nonpartisan analysis where policymakers, scholars, journalists, and leaders gather together to confront global challenges with seriousness, rigor, and perspective. We are deeply honored that CFR President Ambassador Michael Froman is with us here this evening to accept the award on behalf of CFR. Ambassador Froman's distinguished career embodies the very spirit of international service we celebrate tonight. As U.S. Trade Representative, he led landmark trade negotiations and strengthened America's economic diplomacy at pivotal moments. Throughout his decades of public service, including senior roles at the White House and in global development efforts, he has championed fairer, more inclusive international economic rules and has consistently advanced the idea that America is strongest when it leads through partnership. As president of the Council on Foreign Relations, Ambassador Froman has broadened CFR's reach, deepened its engagement with communities across the country, and reaffirmed the essential role of informed dialogue in a rapidly changing world. His leadership continues to elevate the national conversation on global affairs, and we are grateful for his vision and commitment. As a CFR member myself, I can say I have seen in action Mike's incredible leadership of this organization, and there's no more worthy person to accept and no more worthy organization to receive this award than Mike and CFR. We are also honored this evening by the presence of Chris Wallace, one of the most respected and trusted journalists of our time. Over a remarkable 60-year career, you're not that old, Chris, 60-year career spanning major networks, groundbreaking interviews, and 3 Emmy Awards, Chris has set the gold standard for clarity, fairness, and accountability in journalism. His work as an interviewer, journalist, and producer has played a crucial role in informing the American public about the forces shaping world events. At a moment when reliable information is more important than ever, Chris's dedication to rigorous, fact-based reporting helps citizens understand complex global developments and strengthens our democratic discourse. So when I reached out to Chris to ask him if he would join us a few months ago, if he would join us for this conference, he immediately said yes. And I said, well, Chris, what do you want to do? We'd be happy to have you be a keynote speaker tomorrow or Friday at the conference. And he said, you know what? I would like to interview. That's what I do. I interview. So how lucky are we to have one of the great diplomats and leaders in foreign policy in our country, Mike Froman, being interviewed by one of the greatest and most respected interviewers and reporters and media personalities in our country, Chris Wallace. So with that, on behalf of the World Affairs Councils of America, it is my great honor to present the 2025 International Service Award to the Council on Foreign Relations, please help me to welcome to the stage Ambassador Michael Froman, who will offer some acceptance remarks, after which he will be joined by Chris Wallace to continue the conversation. I'm going to stand for the photos.
I have a perfect place on my shelf for this. There we go. Well, thanks, Glenn, very much. That was a very generous introduction. You were generous to talk about all of the trade negotiations that I led and the agreements that I reached. You're also generous not to mention that all of them failed to get through Congress. But we'll leave that for another part of the discussion. Let me start by thanking Matthew Hughes and WACA for this great honor for the Council on Foreign Relations, particularly in light of who has received it before. Ambassador Linda Thomas Greenfield, Ambassador Tom Pickering, Secretary of State Jim Baker, Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is now the head of the World Trade Organization. I view Ngozi actually as a personal friend. Ever since I published an article in Foreign Affairs saying the WTO was dead, I'm not sure she views me in quite the same way, but she is a great friend. And let me just say, sitting here tonight and hearing about all the work that the World Affairs Councils at the national level and at the local level do, there's just so much shared DNA between WACA and the Council on Foreign Relations. Usually when I go to these kinds of events, we're the oldest organization in the room, and being 104 years old. But I understand WACA actually began in 1918, 3 years before the Council on Foreign Relations. So we're the little brother, we're the little sister of WACA, and delighted to be here. Let me say a few words about the council. Many of you, I think, know it. Some of you are members, which we're delighted. Thank you for paying your dues. But let me say a little bit about who we are and what we do. We're a think tank, like many others here in Washington, but we're also a publisher of Foreign Affairs Magazine, which I continue to believe is the leading magazine in the field. We are a convener here in Washington, in New York, but in cities across the country. We have networks of opinion leaders who we work with, religious leaders, local journalists, local and state elected officials, technologists, opinion leaders who we work with because in the hope that as we share information with them, they can reach their broader community. And of course, very much in line with your mission of bringing together communities of people around these important issues. We become an educational organization, providing curricular support material for high schools and universities. And we see very much one of our core functions, one of our core objectives, to help identify, develop, and promote the next generation of diverse foreign policy expertise, not unlike your student scholars. And let me just take a moment. Wasn't Roberto kind of amazing? So I hope your student scholars at the appropriate time will think about internships, research assistant positions, junior staff, young professionals program, term membership at the council as a way of continuing their development in the field. All this is to say is there isn't a single program that's the council, but it's many programs. But if the engagement between the council and WACA was embodied by one person, it would be Irina Fascianos, who runs our national and our outreach program, and has really helped the council grow from what was initially a group of financiers in New York to what's now a national and international organization with fully 46% of our members. A plurality of our members are outside of New York and Washington, and they're spread out around the rest of the country and in some foreign countries as well. So thank you, Irina, for all that you do to build that out. And as I'll mention, no good deed goes unpunished, so we're doubling down on her role to help do more events elsewhere around the country as well. Our mission is to help inform U.S. engagement with the world. That is our mission. That is our North Star. Again, not very different from the WACA mission as well. And it comes at a particularly important moment because the world is more complex now, I think, than it's been in probably 80 years. It would have been complex if I had been here last year. I would have said it was complex because you had the reemergence of great power politics. You have an unprecedented competition with China across military, political, economic, and the technological domains. You've got transnational issues like pandemics or climate change or transnational crime that require international cooperation precisely at a time when the mechanisms of international cooperation, the institutions, are particularly weak or stressed. All of that would have been true a year ago. And now I think, of course, we have a new factor, which is that the United States itself has opened questions that we long thought had been resolved about the nature of the global trading system, the nature of alliances, how are adversaries to be managed. And that is a challenge for all of us who believe very firmly in U.S. engagement with the world being a positive, both for the world and for the United States, that we take those questions seriously and work through them and try and bring understanding of what the different kinds of trade-offs and costs and benefits are, different ways of engaging. The Council, like WACA, is a nonpartisan institution. We're an independent institution, and we've engaged on these big questions before. I mean, in 1921, when we were founded, it was right after the First World War. It was right after the League of Nations had been defeated by the U.S. Senate, and we were founded to push back against rising isolationism. In the 1940s, the Council was the place where the Marshall Plan and NATO we helped formulate it. In fact, there's a long story that Dwight Eisenhower, as many of you know, between being general and being president, moved to New York. He was president of Columbia University. By the way, not a great president of Columbia University. And he also ran a study group at the Council. Not a great study group. They had trouble meeting consensus. But the one thing that came out of the study group was this idea of what should we do with Europe beyond the Marshall Plan? And the idea was, let's create an alliance, and became NATO. And Dwight Eisenhower became the first Supreme Allied Commander of Europe to run NATO. And so at critical moments in history, in the 1960s, we had a young professor from Harvard named Henry Kissinger who came, ran a task force on nuclear strategy. It became the CFR book, Nuclear Weapons and Foreign Policy, and helped formulate nuclear strategy ever since. And in 1991, at the end of the Cold War, the Council was a place where geoeconomics was born, and the whole idea of where the global economy and geopolitics come together. This is another one of those inflection points. It's another one of those points where we need to both respond to the immediate, but also take a step back and ask ourselves, what comes next? We're going through a grand experiment right now. And wherever you are on the political spectrum, we can all agree that, again, fundamental issues are being opened that we need to address seriously. How do we ensure that coming out of this grand experiment, we're doing what is best for American national interests? And in that regard, we're doubling down on, as I mentioned, on our national program, doing more events around the rest of the country. I'm sure there'll be opportunities to collaborate around that. We're doubling down on reaching new audiences with our digital capacity and reaching non-traditional audiences and people who don't necessarily have an opportunity to gather around a World Affairs Council or a CFR program and have conversations about this, but who are very important to this political process. Because it's not just about us conveying our expertise. You know, we have 90 fellows. They have a lot of expertise about every corner of the world, but it's also about hearing from them how they're viewing the role of the U.S. in the world and what's important to them. Because certainly one thing we've learned over the last decade or so is that the American public has strong views on these matters, and they will affect our politics. And therefore, we need to have a better understanding of where they're coming from and how to ensure that we're addressing that. So in many ways, we were born out of the same motivation to have discussions around the rest of the country, bring people together to address the big issues, to promote civil discourse, to make it possible for people to disagree better, to get around the issues of foreign policy and have a meaningful discussion about what direction the country should go in. It's been a great 104 years for us, 107 years for you. Happy birthday. And we very much look forward to partnering with you in the years and decades ahead. Thank you again for this honor for the Council.
I'm not just taking the stage or storming. I'm supposed to do this. First of all, it is an honor to talk to you, Ambassador, and an honor to have this conversation in front of this group. The theme of this conference is the need for balance. And in a sense, although you didn't specifically say it, you were talking about that. And I want to pursue that with you. And to begin with the global architecture that has kind of preserved or tried to preserve that balance for the last 80 years. In the wake of World War II, we created NATO and the United Nations and Bretton Woods and GATT to help keep the peace and to help govern international trade. And over these 80 years, I think it's fair to say they did a pretty good, not a perfect, but a pretty good job at both of those. But it feels now, and you kind of alluded to this, that all of that is in doubt and all of that is under threat. And I wonder how concerned you are about the disruption, the threat, the possibility of the tearing down of this global architecture after what it's done over the last 8 decades.
Well, first of all, I agree with you. I think it has done a pretty good job of maintaining peace and making prosperity possible around the world. And we shouldn't take that for granted, and we should value that as we weigh what the trade-offs are of going down a different path. Having said that, I think no system was the system was not perfect, and policies were not perfect. And I think in many respects, what I think President Trump has done is shine a spotlight on certain imperfections and challenge us to say, okay, what are we going to do about it? So when he went to the UN in September, gave a speech that got a lot of attention for all sorts of other issues, the escalator, the tile, et cetera. But the teleprompter. But it was hard to disagree with his assessment that the UN had not been meeting its potential, or that, you know, where was the UN while all these wars are going on? How come they weren't there trying to solve some of these wars? Now, one can say they probably could have done more with more U.S. support, but it's not just that. This has been going on for some time, and I think he's raised questions about that, questions about the trading system. How do we make sure it's fair? And so I don't think we're going to end up throwing out everything that was built after the Second World War, but I think we're going to end up reforming and adjusting it. And so, you know, if I take the trading system, which is the piece I'm probably, you know, most familiar with, a lot of great things happened over 80 years, including for the United States. The idea that somehow everybody else benefited and the United States didn't is wrong. You know, as I say, the benefits of globalization are broadly felt but largely invisible. Nobody walks out of a Walmart saying, thank God for the World Trade Organization, right? You know, but it's been successive rounds of trade negotiations that make it possible for low-income Americans to spend a smaller portion of their disposable income on the necessities of life. And that is largely invisible. But the costs of globalization were very acute and very visible. The factory in Youngstown that closed, and it was the only factory in town, and the jobs were lost, and the men couldn't be employed, and there was increased opioid use, and the town began to sort of fray at the edges, and that had political ramifications. Those are the issues we need to address, because I don't think any administration, Democratic or Republican, this is nonpartisan, have done enough to really think through, okay, how do we make sure American workers benefit from a rapidly changing economy, whether that change is coming from automation, which is where most economists think it comes from trade, from immigration, from whatever.
I'm going to get to because I know that's your particular area of expertise, to the trade and economic issue a little bit later, but let's talk about national and international security. And the question I have is, you know, and Trump was certainly not the first American president to criticize the effectiveness of the United Nations, but when you see his general lack of support for the United Nations and raising very serious questions about his support for NATO, do you see a constructive path to a more secure future, or do you see us tearing down things that, in fact, are useful and not replacing them with things that are better?
So those are two great examples. I mean, take NATO. Several presidents have been pressing our allies to spend more on defense and bear more of the burden. President Trump, again, has a unique and unorthodox way of pursuing some of these issues, to say the least. But by threatening to pull out or by threatening to withdraw, by threatening to cut budgets, between President Trump and President Putin, NATO is now stronger, I think, than it's ever been. Right? We've got two more countries in it, Sweden and Finland. You have our NATO allies committing to spend 5% of GDP. Now, whether that is a real 5% or not really a 5%, but it's an increase over what they had done before. I mean, just to look at Germany, what a remarkable transformation of Germany, who at the beginning of the Ukraine war said the only thing they could do was send helmets to Ukraine. And now they've changed their laws so they can spend more than 3% on defense. And they're buying real weapons and they're pursuing a real defense strategy. So I think NATO will end up being stronger, but in part as a reaction to this disruption, in this case, coming from two directions, both from the East and from the West. The UN, very interesting, just this week, the UN Security Council approved the United States plan for Gaza. So the U.S. felt the need to go to the UN to get its approval and worked the halls of First Avenue and 42nd Street to get it done, prevented Russia and China, who agree with us on almost nothing, from vetoing it because they felt it was important to have the imprimatur of the UN there in order to get other countries to participate in it. So, I think oftentimes the president will do things and say things that are sort of shocking, but underneath it, there's like a nugget of truth. There's like an element of something of value that we need to take seriously. And focusing on those things like burden sharing in NATO or making the UN more effective when it comes to rebuilding Gaza, I think those are where there's a possibility these institutions can be headed in the future.
For most or all of the lives of everybody in this room, we have lived in a world power structure, a bipolar world power structure of the Cold War, succeeded by a unipolar structure of U.S. hegemony. And actually, I already had the quote, which you said here, which is that we are now living in the most complex international environment since the end of World War II. How do you define what that environment is? It isn't bipolar, it's not unipolar. What is it? And is there a way from here through to something that some way or another keeps a general world peace?
So some people have said we're now in a multipolar world, which I actually disagree with. Multipolarity suggests you've got 3 or 4 groups of countries that basically do everything together, alliances, et cetera, which doesn't really exist right now. The term that I use for it is polyamorous. All right. And I'll use India as the archetypal example. India loves the United States for our civil nuclear cooperation, for our technology cooperation, for a place to send their entrepreneurs to grow global businesses. They love Russia for munitions and oil. They love Iran for energy. And they love and they hate China, depending on the issue and sort of the day of the week. And so they will play all sides. And by the way, you could say the same thing about several of the other countries around the world. There'll be very few countries, I think, that end up doing everything together. They're either with us or against us, the way it was during the Cold War. What that means, though, it goes back to the issue of complexity. It's a lot harder to engage in diplomacy and pull together coalitions of the willing, groups of countries around particular issues that may vary from issue to issue. You may be India may be with us on one set of issues and against us or neutral on another set of issues. And our job is going to be to try and get them into our camp as often as possible on the issues that really matter. And they will continue to play all sides against the middle in a very promiscuous way. You're going to remember this, Chris, aren't you?
Well, I guess the natural follow-up is, I think most of us would agree that a polyamorous outlook wouldn't work in our personal lives, certainly in our marriages. Does it work as a world order?
Well, it does introduce a certain degree of instability, you might say. I'm not sure it's consistent with the notion of on balance of this conference.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe purposely off balance, but I think that's the reality of it. I mean, I don't think countries are rushing into China's camp. They're not going to trust China for their defense. They're not going to trust China on a lot of their telecom or technology needs, knowing about how China pursues a surveillance state. They don't share values necessarily with China, but they're going to hedge. They're going to hedge against the United States, and we've given them some reason to hedge. But even without that, there's a certain degree of sort of entropy in the system, such that the bipolar period lasted for 40 years, the unipolar lasted for 30 years. Now it's time for something else to put in its place, and it's likely to take a while for that to settle down. I think in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of promiscuity.
And where does China fit in all of this as a counterweight, both in the national security front and also in the economic front to the United States?
So look, China is an unprecedented. The U.S.-China relationship is an unprecedented relationship. It's not like the Cold War. I mean, Russia, it was not a significant part of the global economy. It was not outside certain military or space areas. It was not a serious technology competitor. As I can't remember which Secretary of State said it. It's a gas station with nuclear weapons. That's what Russia is. But China's different. China is a formidable competitor across all of these domains. And we've never had a competitor like that. And so, one, it's going to force us to be at our best, to maintain our innovation, to maintain our technological edge where it matters, to ensure that we're doing what's necessary on our defense and national security, and to try and get other countries around the world, allies and partners, to work with us. And sometimes what we do helps that. Sometimes we hurt that. We hurt that effort. We're frankly lucky, I have to say, that China has been as poor as it has been in exercising soft power. Because I think had China been better at soft power, they could have sort of run the tables on us over the last several years. But they have this way of kind of getting in their own way. The Belt and Road Initiative, brilliant initiative. I mean, spend a lot of money around the world building infrastructure that these countries need. And, we're not going to be there spending that money, but the Chinese will. But they did it in such a way, such a ham-handed way, loaning too much, ending up owning the properties. The infrastructure wasn't so great. It was falling apart. They sent Chinese workers in to build it, which local communities didn't love. And, as a result, it didn't get them the goodwill that they could have earned had they put that money to use in some different way. And, most recently, it was very interesting, the last month, I think that China has had a fair degree of success, and we've helped them with this, in painting the U.S. as the disruptor, as the revisionist power. That China would say, we believe in the multilateral trading system, we believe in the UN, we believe in these institutions. It's just the U.S. that's trying to blow everything up. And then about a month ago, they announced this export control system, this licensing system, which said to the rest of the world, we realize we control the choke points for all of this critical material that you need. We're now putting in a system where we could disrupt global supply chains overnight. And the rest of the world was like, whoa, that is not what we expected from, a power that says it supports open and global trade and multilateral rules and, and the like. And as a result, now I think a lot of countries view the U.S. and China both as being disruptors to the system. There's a certain degree of equivalence there. And I think it was, again, from the Chinese perspective, I think it was very much an own goal. I think they sort of shot themselves in their foot.
I want to just do one last question on national security, and that gets to the question of balance within our country, not internationally. While Americans, I'm old enough to have seen a lot of disagreements. People always say, is this the worst you ever saw? And I go, well, 1968 was really pretty tough. And if you were around and cognizant in 1968. You know how right I am. While Americans have disagreed a lot over a lot of things over a lot of years, I think it's fair to say, I don't know if you'll agree or not, that we have never seen the kind of internal polarization that we see in our country right now. And I wonder how you think that kind of imbalance inside the country, that division inside our country, affects our place in the world.
I think our greatest vulnerability as a country, we have so many strengths. We could talk about our strengths. Our greatest vulnerability, in my view, is our political dysfunctionality, which goes back to this question of polarization. The fact that we have such a hard time getting anything done as a polity, whether it's a budget, keeping the government open for more than a few months at a time, or dealing with the fundamental issues that we all know we need to deal with, whether it's education or healthcare or national defense or the like. So it does very much affect our standing. And by the way, I think it's another reason why the World Affairs Council, the Council on Foreign Relations, other like-minded organizations, why now more than ever, the role that we try to play collectively is important, because trying to get people locally around the country to understand the issues, but to work through them. I love taking Governor Spencer Cox of Utah's phrase, disagree better. We're going to disagree over things, but let's disagree better. Let's work through the issues, understand the pros and cons. We'll vote our own ways, but let's make it civil and let's make it productive. And then hopefully the political system will be able to function better. That's our greatest vulnerability.
Let's talk some economics and some trade. I think it's fair to say that President Trump has imposed the most far-reaching tariff regime in modern world history, certainly modern American history. What impact do you think that has on the international trading system?
Well, it has sort of put everything up for grabs. I mean, we've sort of ignored all of our international commitments, and so that in itself is a signal that international commitments don't really mean anything. They're sort of suggestions, and when it's our national interest, we're going to do whatever we want to do unilaterally. It also has taken a very significant step forward in introducing friction into the global economy. Now, it has not been, economically, it has not been so far as catastrophic as many people expected, many economists and others expected. And they're all trying to think through, well, why is it? Is it too early? Are there competing, are there elements that sort of balance it? For example, the whole significant investment in AI happens to be coming exactly at the time that we're introducing all this friction into the global economy. Half of our GDP growth has come from the investment in AI and AI infrastructure. So would we be in a recession but for the fact that this happened at the same time as this AI boom? That's possible. It's possible it just takes more time to work through the system. But, I was talking to a representative of an Asian country today, and he was saying, actually, we're adjusting, and all that we care about is that we have the same level of tariffs as our competitive other countries. So if we're all at 15, that's great. We just can't be at 19 and they're at 15. Now, if you had asked them a year ago, 15, they would have pulled their hair out, because at that point we were at 2.5% tariffs. But they've adjusted and they've sort of figured out that on a relative basis, they can compete as long as they're not in an adverse position vis-a-vis other countries. And by the way, I see, the Trump administration in recent days and weeks beginning to make adjustments. Come to the conclusion, for example, that no matter how high the tariffs are, we are unlikely to grow bananas and coffee in the United States. Who knew? I mean, who knew? But it's not just those two. It's a whole raft of other products that we've decided we can lower the tariffs or make exemptions. And at the same time, the president had, I think, quite a successful trip to Asia recently, where he negotiated a series of agreements: Korea, Japan, Malaysia, Cambodia, Australia. to bring them countries together around things like critical minerals. And how do we work together on critical minerals, on some of these vulnerabilities that we now have vis-a-vis China? So I guess I'm slightly more optimistic than I was a few months ago, where it just seemed like tariffs for its own sake, and we were taking a big bet that behind a wall of tariffs, every company was going to move its production to the United States. And when you talk to CEOs and boards, they're not so sure about that. These are big decisions, multi-billion-dollar decisions sometimes. They want to make sure they understand what the tariffs are going to be for the long run and whether it's really worth it to move it to the United States. And my guess is they're going to keep on waiting to see until there's some greater degree of clarity.
You just made me think when you talked about the president's trip to Asia and the trade deals he announced with a number of countries. He met with President Xi and announced a trade deal with them. And what I have often found, and I suspect a lot of people here, is you get a big announcement, a big headline, and then 3 months later, 6 months later, there's no there. And I guess the question for an expert like you to all of us non-experts, when you look at what Trump and Xi agreed to, are you impressed by how much it is and how tough and tight it is, or that maybe not there's no there, but there's not much there?
Yeah, look, I think that's a fair criticism. I mean, a lot of these agreements up to now, there are a couple exceptions, have been sort of frameworks or agreements to potentially agree on something that might be worked out later on. And there seems to be this thing of 2 weeks. Everything is 2 weeks away, right? Peace in Ukraine is 2 weeks away. Peace in the Middle East is 2 weeks away. Peace with Iran. Same with some of these agreements. Now, I'll come back to China in a second. There was, again, very little reported. Malaysia. The Malaysia agreement is it's longer than any other agreement. It's more detailed. It's a template for other agreements that they just signed with a number of Latin American countries. So I think they're beginning to put some flesh on the bones, but there's a long way to go until these are really fully fleshed out agreements. The thing on China, which I think is a little surprising, is that both sides escalated in order to de-escalate. So we threatened to go to 100% additional tariffs. The Chinese threatened to impose this new export control system. They got together, they agreed, let's delay the export control system. Let's not do 100% tariffs right now. I don't know whether that's progress or not, because all you've done is sort of gone back to the status quo ante from where you were before. And what came out of the U.S.-China relationship was, to the degree there was an agreement, it was on soybeans, fentanyl, and TikTok. Those were the three pillars of the agreement. And this is the most important bilateral relationship in the world. There are huge issues, economic issues around different philosophies and strategies and how one country's trajectory affects the rest of the world. There are big security issues, Taiwan, South China Sea. There are regional issues like North Korea, non-proliferation. Of course, there's the issue of Chinese support for Russia's war on Ukraine. And yet the relationship came down to, a bean, an illegal drug, and a social media platform. And that, to me, is a bit of a surprise, because we need to get to those fundamental issues if we're going to actually reach some sort of balance, to take the word from this conference, some degree of stability in the relationship.
As was mentioned, you were President Obama's U.S. trade representative in his second term. The Supreme Court right now is considering a case about whether or not President Trump is able to take away Congress's authority over tariffs, and if and when he declares it a national emergency. How would Mr. Justice Froman rule in that case?
Yeah, I went to law school, but I only play a lawyer on TV. It's a fascinating. It's so interesting for a trade nerd like myself to see that trade is going all the way up to the Supreme Court like this, in one of probably the hotly debated cases of the year. My sense is that the court will find that the president overreached in using this particular law, what's called IEPA, the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, to impose blanket tariffs on the whole world. And whether they find a narrow solution to it or a broad solution, I don't really know yet. I actually don't think it matters that much, because Congress has delegated all sorts of other authorities to the president. They're a little more cumbersome. They take a little more time, a little more process. But if the president is determined to impose tariffs on other countries, which he is, and which other countries have now largely adjusted to, he will do so. And he will find some way of legally being able to do so. So I think, there's like to be a lot of Sturm und Drang around this, but at the end of the day, we're going to live in a world with more tariffs. And that's a world that is less efficient, more expensive, with much more friction in it. And the question is whether these other things that are happening in the economy, including AI, are going to increase productivity so much as to make up for it, or whether we're in for a slower growth global economy, more broadly going forward.
I want to do a few final questions, and you just said the magic word AI. I mean, there's also this tension between continuity and change in our system as we're talking about balance. Do you look at artificial intelligence more as an opportunity or more as a threat?
Yeah, I'm on the more optimistic side of things. I think it is certainly an opportunity for doing some really incredible things when it comes to, for example, medical research. And so I'm hopeful that we're able to develop those tools and get them deployed broadly, because I think they'll have real impact on people. But I remember I was at a conference about a year ago, and one of the founders of modern AI was there talking about AI and about extinction risk, about the bad side of this, that
that's bad.
Machines could,
Extinction. That's bad.
Extinction's generally bad. And he's like, but look, it's only like a 5% chance. And I thought, okay, I learned from Bob Rubin, who I worked closely with. Bob Rubin was an expert on arbitrage, and he would get out his yellow pad and look at any decision and say, all right, there's a 60% chance of this outcome, and that's worth X. And there's a 5% chance of this outcome, and that's worth Y. And, if it's a 5% of extinction risk, I think you have to take that seriously. And think about what kind of guardrails, what kind of rules of the road, what kind of governance you need. We're in this strange race on this because, if China didn't exist, if it was just our scientists, just our technologists working on AI, we'd say, whoa, let's slow down, let's get the governance right, let's figure this out before we race towards artificial general intelligence or super intelligence, et cetera, singularity. But because it's viewed as part of this broader competition with China, there's a sense that we have to stay ahead, and therefore we can't afford any restrictions that could possibly slow us down, because certainly China's not slowing down. China's not worried about this. They're not worried about governance and worried about ethics and any of these other issues. And so that's I think the real challenge for policymakers is, because I think it is important that we win, whatever winning means in this regard, but you want to win in such a way that doesn't achieve that 5% extinction risk, ideally.
Do you, I don't expect you to get deep into policy. I hope you don't go deep into policy, but do you have general thoughts about guardrails, how we make artificial intelligence and its growing impact on our lives more of a positive and less of a danger?
So I think focusing on some of the things that we would all agree are dangerous and trying to get our arms around that. Can we agree, including with the Chinese, can we agree that we do not want to take the human out of the loop on the decision to launch nuclear weapons? That seems like a pretty good one to start with, and if you start there and you sort of move from there and say, okay, what other sorts of belts and suspenders would you like to see on this? Ideally, I think there's some hope. But I think just today the administration announced they want to preempt a lot of the state rules on on artificial intelligence to get state rules out of the way of our private sector so that it can compete and continue to advance and hopefully win against the competition. Yeah, I think in that context, we just have to be really cognizant of, okay, what are the thresholds you don't want to cross, and then what are the mechanisms? And the problem is, going back to political dysfunctionality, even when our politics work best, the speed of government and regulation is never going to be able to keep up with the speed of innovation in the private sector. And it's so hard for policymakers, without any criticism of them, to understand what's going on with AI, let alone put their arms around it and say, we understand it all. We've thought through the 5 ways that you could put guardrails around it, and we've decided this is the one where the cost-benefit calculation makes the most sense. That's just way beyond our capability right now.
We also have, up till now, enjoyed a balance in our environment, which is now under existential threat from climate change. And I noticed that in preparing for this, that in April, the Council on Foreign Relations started something called the Climate Realism Initiative. What are your general thoughts about how, particularly as the situation is getting worse, and I forget, I read just this last week that we're now 1.5% over where we were in pre-industrial times. What do we do about it? How do we, or is it too late? And particularly, I say this at a time when climate change has become part of the anti-woke movement, and just like DEI is out and a lot of other things, climate change is now seen as being a woke weakness.
Look, I think because it is existential in many respects, I think we have to we can't take our eyes off the ball of what we need to do to address it. But I do think we need to look beyond big conferences with tens of thousands of people working on a document, which may or may not have any impact on the actual trajectory of climate change, and focus on, in my view, 2 things. One is technology, and the other is finance. And how do you ensure that you can finance the scaling up of technology that can help us get there? So I'm actually a little bit more optimistic. I'm not optimistic about keeping to the 1.5 degrees centigrade that was agreed to in Copenhagen and in Paris and the various other big UN meetings, because I think we're going to end up blowing through those. But I am optimistic that there is so much innovation going on in the energy sector. You know, people actually talking seriously for the first time about commercial scale fusion, or about, you know, blue and green hydrogen, or about new ways of getting to renewables, or even cleaner fossil fuels that capture methane and do carbon capture and sequestration. So there's just a lot going on in the technology area. And then the question is, how do you unleash the finances to ensure that when the technology is found, it can be scaled up? And to me, that's what the Climate Realism Initiative is about, is to say, it's great that diplomats are meeting, it's important, but at the same time, we have to focus on stuff on the ground that's going to actually have an impact, and that means getting this technology out into the field and scaling it up.
Finally, as we face all of these threats or challenges or questions about our national security and about international trading, what can groups like this, the World Affairs Councils of America, I suppose also the Council on Foreign Relations, what can they do to have an impact? I mean, it's certainly important to be educated, and I think everybody will feel that tonight was valuable and the dessert was delicious. But I guess the question is, can these groups make a practical difference? Can they have an impact?
Look, I think they really can. And I'll just point to sort of the counterfactual, which is, I think a lot of people, if we look back at the last couple of elections, I think a lot of people around the country felt alienated by institutions, alienated by the system, feeling like the global economy wasn't working for them, feeling like we were involved in forever wars, I'm feeling like, we needed to put America first in a different way than had been put before. By the way, I believe every American president has put America first. I don't know any president that's come in saying, I think we're number two. It's like, everything they did was about America first. It's just we defined how to get there in different ways. But we've seen the political implications, which have relevance to policy, of not addressing these issues. And I think what groups like the World Affairs Council, what we aspire to do as your little brother at the Council on Foreign Relations to do, is to, one, be out there and help educate, but also be out there and have a dialogue so that we understand where people are coming from. What are the issues? Is it affordability? Is it empowerment? Is it the nature of their community that they're feeling is changed? What is it that's driving them to say they want more populism, they want more protectionism, they want more nationalism, they don't want the U.S. to lead? What's driving those feelings, and how do we address those issues and take them seriously? And I'm not sure, I'll just speak for the council, not for the World Affairs Council. The council has been historically seen as, an elite East Coast institution. Well, we're not East Coast. Plurality of our members are elsewhere around the country. And we've moved a big direction towards not just focusing on policymakers down the street here, but focusing on local religious leaders, local journalists, local and state elected officials, local communities, educators, students, and the broader public, and see that as part of our mission too. That's the kind of things we can do together, and I think together, we can probably have a big impact on that.
Mr. Ambassador, thank you.
Thank you.
This was a pleasure.
Likewise.
I think we're done.
For closing remarks, please welcome to the stage Treasurer of the World Affairs Councils of America, Steve Lackey.
Thank you very much. It's my role tonight as the wrap-up is to summarize all of these remarks. It's incredible, but I would put it under the heading of celebration. We are celebrating tonight an incredible student leader, Roberto Carmona. We are celebrating leaders of our councils across the country, in this case, Mimi Gregory and Tanya Medarev. One moment on Mimi. The first time I met Mimi was incredible. The Naples chapter has 2,000 members, and it is completely volunteer run. There's not $1 spent on staff. Absolutely incredible. And the programs are amazing. We are celebrating, if I think about, I came from Pittsburgh chapter originally, Pittsburgh Council. I was lucky enough to be chair of the Pittsburgh Council, and part of the mission of our council is to convene and connect people around global issues. And we certainly did that this evening. We just heard from Ambassador Froman and from Chris Wallace the important role of our country as a global leader. And I also learned a new perception of polyamorous that I don't think I will ever forget. But most importantly, it was all in a nonpartisan manner. And that is the crux of our councils across our country. So again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Ambassador Froman. Thank you, Chris Wallace, for leading us in an inspirational conversation this evening. And I hope you all enjoy the rest of this week. Thank you.